Today we're going to tackle one of the big ones, a film that's frequently cited not only as one of the greatest films of all time, but arguably the greatest film of all time. I'm speaking, of course, of 1941's Citizen Kane, a film that more than 80 years later I still see referenced somewhat frequently. Rosebud, the big line from the movie, is almost as iconic, I would argue, as I Am Your Father. It's a film I see a lot of directors say is their favorite movie. A lot of people cite this with completely revolutionizing how films were made. So we're just going to take a look at it and see how it lives up to the reputation it has. So Citizen Kane was made in 1941, as I said. It is directed and starring Orson Welles. This was after War of the Worlds. People of my generation might know him as the voice of Unicron in the Transformers movie. And it's frequently cited as the greatest movie ever made. It might be the plurality pick. I mean, obviously, there's no universal or majority pick for the greatest movie of all time. But if you were to give people a bunch of people a list of movies, particularly people who work in screenwriting or in Hollywood or whatever, this one might get the most votes. So it certainly has a lot to live up to. Now, rewatching it, something I noticed almost immediately, and I noticed the first time I watched it, was how modern it feels compared to a lot of movies of the era. And obviously, modern or recent doesn't necessarily mean good, but I just felt like a lot of the editing, a lot of the pacing, the dialogue, compared to a lot of films from this period, I feel there's a lot less just wasted space where they're just trying to fill out the running time. There's something from movies, particularly from before the 1990s, that I like to call the presence, which is this, it's kind of difficult to describe, but it's this embalmed, sluggish, excruciating quality to a film that just makes it very difficult to watch and feels like you're in the waiting room prior to dental surgery. I've heard this described by some other people. One person said it's because there's a slow-moving A plot and there's no B plot, so there's really nothing to kind of break things up, and so you're just kind of left there waiting for something to happen. There's no pacing, or it's very inconsistent. A lot of movies from this era I find will be like 80% dead air, and then something will happen and it'll go back to being basically dead air. A lot of movies that Mystery Science Theater 3000 covers or early episodes of The Next Generation, I think kind of embody this. But once again, if I find something that really, really like a particular movie, I'll post about it. So Citizen Kane is polished, tightly paced, and more professional in a way few productions of its time were. Obviously, another one that's comes to mind would be Casablanca, which I think also is unusually good when it comes to pacing and editing compared to a lot of movies in this time period. So before we get into it, let's take a look at where this goes on the media taste scale. So I decided to put this into the contemplative category. That is, it is reflective and conceptual. So the movie is a deliberately paced puzzle box narrative that asks you to analyze fragments rather than immerse in emotion. The story is built on ideas and structure rather than mood. You're invited to think your way through Kane's life, not feel your way through it. So it's reflective in the sense that the narrative unfolds through flashbacks and long dialogues. It doesn't unfold through action per se, or what you're watching telling you how to think and why to think it and giving you easy answers as you go along. Like I said, it's a lot more flashbacks and long dialogues. The pacing is very deliberate. Stuff emerges gradually over time. And the tension lies in interpretation. There aren't like major plot twists or immediate stakes. It's kind of almost, I don't know if whimsical is the right term, but I guess a puzzle box or kind of trying to put together a mystery is very much how you would describe the movie. Now, I put this more in the reflective category because it doesn't really tell you what to think, and it's very heavily based on viewer interpretation. The pacing of this I do not find particularly slow, And despite this movie being about 2 hours long, it really did not feel that long to me, which is kind of rare for something in this category. So I would say this is like mildly contemplative. When it comes to conceptual, though, I'd say this movie is quite conceptual. It focuses on a lot of big issues like the reliability of memory, how it's structured, the idea of an unreliable narrator, the process that you go through to try to understand someone, how people's perceptions of the same event or the same person can vary very wildly. It very much is just a whole bunch of different kind of ideas around identity and personality. So a rough thing I use to determine whether I'd put something in conceptual or sensory is, would it work better as a book, or would it work better if there was no dialogue in it? And I think this is something you could very easily make a book, and I don't think it would lose like a ton of its strength. Like I think you could very easily write this as a novel, and it would probably work perfectly well. Well, its visual style and cinematography are legendary. I think it's really its themes, its characters, its storytelling ability that make it stand out. So let's start to go through kind of a summary of the movie. Obviously, there's going to be spoilers, but this movie's 80 years old. So the film opens with our main character, Charles Foster Kane, dying at his massive castle, Xanadu, in Florida, because of course he lives in Florida, saying his final word, Rosebud. And the remainder of the movie will be devoted to trying to figure out what Rosebud meant, because no one really has heard of it before, and it just seems kind of random for a man of his stature. We're then treated to a newsreel that summarizes his life. It talks about how he came from a poor childhood and was sent away. His mother got a whole bunch of money as a gold mine was found on their property in Colorado. It then talks about how he became the heir to a massive trust fund, and when he came of age, he got all these profits from the gold mine and stuff that had been invested in, and he immediately became one of the richest men in the world. It then went on to how he built the New York Enquirer, getting them mixed up, and built it into a sensationalist newspaper media empire. He controlled newspapers all across America. For a while, he was the most influential person in the United States, just slightly behind the president, and just all the other ventures and stuff that he got into, and how it kind of faded away over time, and the Depression largely left him devastated. So we kind of go through this brief summation of his life, but it becomes very clear right from the start. We don't really know anything about him from this. Okay, we know that he was from Colorado to a poor family. We know that he became extremely wealthy. We know that he was a newspaper magnate. But what kind of a man was Charles Foster Kane? What made him tick? What were his motivations, his dreams, how he treated other people? We just kind of see this very brief glance into a very complicated person, and it's supposed to feel deeply dissatisfying. And I find if you rewatch this movie, it feels even more so. And our other main character, the reporter Thompson, also feels that way. So he sets out to uncover the meaning of the word Rosebud, as he thinks it might be the key to grasping the enigmatic figure, and that if he can just figure it out, then everything else will fall into place. It's the missing piece of the puzzle, as it were. And so to try to figure it out, he goes to all of the people who shaped Kane's life, at least the ones who are still alive. In the case of Thatcher, his foster father, he goes and reads his memoirs. And we go through, like I said, we interview Kane's various associates. It mostly goes in chronological order, fortunately, and we see all these different accounts of him. Now, it should be noted that all of these come from unreliable narrators. Most of these people have bones to pick with him. Most of these people have issues with him and try to portray him in the worst light possible. So it can kind of be difficult, and it's harder, I find, in film rather than in like text to show an unreliable narrator, because as the viewer we kind of have an omniscient view. We're theoretically seeing objectively what's going on as someone in a corner rather than someone's direct first person perspective like you might have with a book. But here's what we can piece together. So, like I said, he was born in Colorado. They discovered a gold mine on the property that his mother put in as a trust, and she gave him away to a banker named Thatcher to raise him. Kane was sitting outside, was playing outside in the snow with his sled. When Thatcher tried to take him away, he smacked him with his sled, and ultimately, though, he was kind of dragged out. We then cut to 25 years later, or sorry, not 25 years later, when Kane is 25, and he inherits control of his trust fund, which, due to the massive output of the gold mine and prudent investing on the part of Thatcher, has left him one of the wealthiest men in the world. And he has all this money and basically no obligations or responsibilities. So the world is his oyster, as the expression goes. He can really do whatever he wants with his life. He can be a philanthropist. He can run for office. He ultimately decided to go into journalism, buying the paper The New York Enquirer, and in Thatcher's interpretation, going on this just spree of attacking businesses. It's very populist. Ironically, it attacks a lot of Thatcher and his own business interests, and just yellow journalism. And Thatcher has a very low opinion of his time as a newsman. It then cuts ahead, because we're going from Thatcher's perspective, because he's reading his memoir, to 1929, wherein a broke Kane is forced to sell his media empire to Thatcher in order to pay the bills. We then go to Mr. Bernstein, who's really the only person who has a positive view of Kane that they interview, who just talks about how genius he is, views him as a man of the people, a man of vision, of great energy and integrity, who bought the Enquirer and succeeded in luring the best journalists to the city to it. And he started out with these really high-minded principles. There is the famous Declaration of Principles he wrote and printed on the front page of the first newspaper that he published. And it was just to be like, to tell the truth, to stand up for the people, just all kind of those good things that summarize journalism and what it's supposed to be, particularly when you're kind of running a populist paper. And so just the sycophantic guy just talks about how successful he is, how amazing he was, and talks about how one of his main ways he came to power was manipulating public opinion in order to start the Spanish-American War. I believe that the quote is something like, "You give me the story and I'll give you the war," which is what William Randolph Hearst, one of the main inspirations for Kane, wound up doing. He also married the niece of the President of the United States. So at this point in time, it's looking like Kane is doing really well for himself. He's married into political royalty. He's extremely wealthy. He's running what at the time is a very successful news empire, and he has kind of the trust, or at least the attention and adoration of the masses. So yeah, so basically Bernstein just goes on to talk about how awesome he is. We then switch perspectives to Leyland, who was formerly his best friend, who recalls that over time, the paper's quality kept going down. The standards for what passed as a legitimate story decreased and decreased and decreased. They frequently would butt heads. Kane eventually decided on a political career, and he campaigned for governor of New York. Now, we aren't really told what party he ran on, or if he ran as an independent. The entire thing was basically his personality and his fame. We don't entirely know what Kane's political views were. He seemed to start out as some sort of reformer, populist, progressive, and then became very conservative and reactionary later in his life. But once again, we don't really get any particular insight into this because none of them really focus on it. So he's running as just the extremely charismatic candidate. It looks like he's going to win, but around this time he starts a affair with the woman who would become his second wife, Susan Alexander, an amateur singer. So both his wife and his opponent find out about it, and it sinks his political career. He winds up divorcing his first wife and marries Susan, which I guess is like, I think it's his attempt to salvage the situation. It's kind of a flex in a way. He's like, okay, so I got completely blown out. My political career failed. I made it to like the end of the race and tripped at the last minute. I lost what should have been the easiest W of my life, but I'm going to salvage stuff. I'm marrying a woman who's way younger and more attractive than me. This is my flex. So what I'm going to do now is I'm not going to just say I'm married to a young woman who is out of my league looks wise, but I'm going to make her into a star. I'm going to make her prestigious. I'm going to make her high status as me, so she's fit to be my wife. So he sets up a career for her as an opera star, which she really does not want to be one. And he goes as far as to build his own opera house just for her to perform in. She is mediocre at best. They get some of the best singing teachers in the world. She hates it. I think at one point she kind of almost wants to kill herself. And she's widely mocked and just humiliated in the press. She wants to stop performing, but Kane forces her to do an entire season, and it's just one big humiliation ritual. Now, whether this is like Kane not wanting to lose face by backing down, if he still thinks that if he wills it hard enough, she can be a star, or whatever, he just decides to go through it. It doesn't go anywhere. It's a disaster, and it strains their already strained marriage. Now, Leland, who we were talking about, who was telling this part of the story, states how he was I think the drama critic. I don't know if the drama critic or the theater critic. So he starts writing a very negative review of Susan's opera debut. So Kane comes in and sees him falling asleep and sees the first part of the negative review and gets irritated almost immediately. He fires Leland, but finishes writing the article and publishes it in the newspaper. So there's two kind of interpretations of this scene. It's kind of one of the big scenes in the movie. Some people view this as him being honest about it, that he realizes on some level that Susan's opera career is a disaster and that Leland was just writing an unbiased account of the opera as he saw it. And so like the last bit of a bit of good in him as far as being an honest newsman compelled him to finish it off and to put it in the paper. Personally, I don't think that was the case. I think he just did it to humiliate Leland and to give him an excuse to fire him with cause. So I don't think it was any kind of pleasant gesture, moral gesture, ethical gesture. I think it was just to humiliate Leland by firing him for writing a negative review of his boss's wife. All right, I got the timeline mixed up a bit. Yeah, so after the opera career, his wife tries to commit suicide. Kane finally allows her to abandon singing, and Kane withdraws in his depression and builds Xanadu, which is a giant castle in Florida, because like I said, of course he's in Florida, because that's where everybody goes. And he fills it with art from all over the world. He fills it with exotic animals, and he just kind of lives there largely by himself, just with Susan and his servants, brooding all day, reflecting on what he's lost. I believe, from my understanding, I don't think it's particularly clear about it, but I think he's lost a lot of his money in the aftermath of the Great Depression, but he still has enough to live a luxurious life, surrounded by his giant statues and exotic animals. Eventually, Susan is tired of basically being Kane's doll, and I can only imagine what else he does with her. But she decides to leave. She gets into a fight with Kane. Kane smacks her, and she walks out on him. He goes nuts and starts destroying her room, until he finds a snow globe, to which he stops, calms down, looks at it, and says, Rosebud. And this is kind of the end. She was the last interview he did. And he concludes that he cannot solve the mystery. That all this stuff that he put together, all these people he interviewed, none of it really brought him any closer to resolving what Rosebud was, or indeed really what he can make of Kane. And we'll read the last bit of dialogue in the movie, which I think is some of the best dialogue in any film, and it's some stuff that I reference a lot throughout my videos. But as the film ends, we see a group of people burning, servants destroying some of the junk and worthless valuables, and we see them take out a sled. The sled says Rosebud on it because that's the name of the maker, and throw it into the furnace where it gets burned. So all this time, Rosebud was the sled. It was the memory of his childhood, something that he held on to for the entirety of his life. And in his last moments, he reflected back on it. And so that's kind of the mystery of the whole thing, is we're given 2 hours of Kane just being a narcissist, an egomaniac, being kind of a dirtbag, and completely without any kind of remorse or emotion. But in the last moments of his life, he has this very sentimental flashback to his childhood. And the meaning of this has been very hotly debated. To my part, there's kind of two main ways that you can interpret this. The first is that it's not so much Kane reflecting on his life and seeing that he did things wrong or wishing he could have done things differently, but he's bemoaning what he lost. And it reminds him of what he had and what he's lost over the course of his life. He lost his news empire. All the stuff that he did since he left Colorado, in his view, turned out to be for nothing, and he never really went anywhere. The other interpretation is that he felt genuine remorse for the way he lived his life, for the people whose lives he ruined, for his selfishness, for his greed. And that's what I think the kind of the other interpretation is. The second is more of the orthodox interpretation. I lean a bit more towards the first. Of course, there's always just the view that we can't really know and it could be something unrelated. But I think given the rest of the movie, those are the two most likely ones. So now I'm going to read the final dialogue scene in the movie. This is when Thompson comes back and they're finishing off the story of Kane. They're taking pictures of Xanadu and they're about to leave, and Thompson comes in. So the photographer says to Thompson, Kane's last words, "Did you ever find out what it means, Jerry?" "No, I did not." "Say, what did you find out about him anyways, Jerry?" "Not much." I do like that because we've spent 2 hours going through every detail of his life, but he sums it up as not much. Well, what have you been doing? Playing with a jigsaw puzzle. I talked to a lot of people who knew him. What did they say? Well, it's become a very clear picture. He was the most honest of men who ever lived, with a streak of crookedness a yard wide. He was a liberal and a reactionary. He was tolerant. Live and let live, that was his motto. But he had no use for anybody who disagreed with him on any point, no matter how small it was. He was a loving husband and a good father, and both of his wives left him, and his son got himself killed about as shabbily as you can do it. He had a gift for friendship such as few men have. He broke his oldest friend's heart like you would throw away a cigarette you were through with. So after that, they're just kind of baffled by what he says. And the girl asks, well, what about Rosebud? Don't you think that explains anything? And Thompson says, no, I don't. Not much anyway. Charles Foster was a Kane. Kane was a man who got everything he wanted and then lost it. Maybe Rosebud was something he couldn't get or lost. No, I don't think that explains anything. I don't think any word explains a man's life. No, I guess Rosebud is just a piece in a jigsaw puzzle, a missing piece. And I think that's just the case with some people. Some people are fairly straightforward. You can kind of figure out what their core is, what makes them tick. And then there's some people who we can go through like we did in this movie. We can see all the major events in Kane's life, how everybody saw him, and still really have no idea who the man was. Now, the comparison I always like to make is Tony Soprano. Not just because I like The Sopranos, but we get more about Tony than pretty much any other character in history. We get 6 or 7 seasons, depending on how you count season 6 of him. We see dreams of his. We see his therapy sessions where he gets psychoanalyzed. And I feel like a certain extent, once you reach the end of the series, you know about as much as Tony as you did when you started. He's still a mystery. What his actual values are, what his actual moral core is. You can say some things about it, but you can't really get a proper picture of who the man was. And I think that's what they were trying to go for with Kane. And so even if we're going to get into this in a second, I don't think they were entirely successful with what they set out to do. I do respect a lot what they started out to do, what they did set out to do, even if they failed to achieve it in some ways. And it was something that really changed the way I looked at people, particularly famous people, particularly, and it is a kind of a lens or a perspective that I've used forever since, with looking at, like I said, particularly complicated men or great men who do things that are sometimes contradictory and are kind of just a mess, like I said, of contradictions, of things that go against each other. And you can't really figure out who is the real person under it, if there even is a real person. So just kind of summarizing the enigmatic core of the film. The film's thesis is a man's life can be documented, yet remain unknowable. So my issue with it is I don't think the movie really delivers on that. I don't think Kane is really an enigmatic character. That might be because either people, the people who they got memories from, either hated him or were sycophantic towards him. And the sycophantic person, ironically, exemplified all his bad characteristics. He just portrayed them as being a good thing. Pretty much everybody says he was egotistical, prideful, hungered for recognition, needed to control things. I think the perspective you get from him, from the different people, doesn't really contradict each other, at least not enough to really deliver on this theme. If there had have been just kind of different perspectives, I came through and I came up with a couple ideas. Maybe he was talking about the news and someone asked him why he did it. And he just said the masses live such difficult, demeaning, disaffected lives that through his media empire, he can bring a little bit of the outside world to them. He can give them relief. He can show them that there's something bigger than themselves. He can maybe give them a bit of entertainment. And he could have said something like about that's the reason why I do it. And you could have thought that that was him lying or not. But I think that would have put an interesting spin on it. Maybe a case where he does a private act of charity. Maybe he sees like a low-level clerk or like the guy who's sweeping the floors while he's working late, and it's close to Christmas, and he gives the guy like $1,000 to go buy gifts for his family. I think if we had to throw in a couple more of those moments in, something kind of humanizing that just seemed very out of place, I think it might have built up the idea that there was more to Kane that meets the eye. Instead, we basically just have Rosebud. And that's about it. Maybe if you interpret the scene of him finishing off the opera article as him having the last bout of conscious and journalistic integrity, you could count that. But honestly, I don't really think so. So Kane's story is told through unreliable narrators, which I think is a good idea. Unreliable narrators are always interesting. I don't know how well it works in film, though, because as I've said, you're seeing it feels very objective. So to try to kind of push home the idea that they are unreliable narrators. I think we needed Welles to kind of act differently in different people's memories, just in terms of even his mannerisms and his speaking and stuff like that, to make it a bit more clear that you're watching a subjective interpretation of him. And like I said, if they had portrayed maybe different sides of him, I think that also would have helped. And a lot of people praise this and they call it ambiguity, and that it's well done. I just don't really agree with that. I think no matter the narrator, we get a pretty good idea of who Kane is. The mystery isn't really Kane, but the limits of the narrative and capturing a person's totality. I think they do that. I think with Rosebud and maybe some of other minor things, or I guess my point is, I think they made their point. I think they have a very good point. I think they have a very good theme. I just don't think they really delivered on it. And the rest of the films, everything that's good about it doesn't really cover that up. So, talking a bit about the various political and religious themes in it. As with a lot of men, in particularly great ones or ambitious ones in Hollywood movies, you can see Kane as a reflection of the American dream. The American dream, the idea that you can have it all. That if you work hard enough or want it hard enough, there's nothing you can't do. And he kind of takes this to his logical extreme, and he sees the entirety of the world as something ready to be taken, something that belongs to him by right, and just all the other people and all the money and all the fame and all the power, and that he's owed this because that is his version of the American dream. And I think he conflates his version of the American dream with the version of the American dream that's held by, well, the leadership of the country and the masses in general. And I think in kind of his narcissistic perception, they're all one and the same. That his self-interest, his way of viewing himself. There's a expression, I forget who said it, with regards to Britain, when the British Empire was at the heart of its power, where someone said history is something that happens to other peoples. That is, there's a certain degree of arrogance that they're so much stronger and so much better than the rest of the world that the rest of the world basically doesn't even really matter anymore. It's free for them to just take or do with what they will. And that's kind of a common criticism of Americans. History belongs to the powerful. Lesser peoples and lesser nations don't really matter. So obviously we have Rosebud, the film's most famous symbol. Like I said, the traditional take is that is the loss of Kane's innocence. It's nostalgia for when he was happy, how he maybe is reflecting that if he had have just lived in Colorado and had a more normal life, things would have worked out better for him and he'd be a happier, better person. And that it was just kind of him bemoaning his bad life choices. For me, I think it's more likely it's just nostalgia for when people loved him and when he was on top of the world, and just the nostalgia for that time period. And then once again, maybe it just means nothing. Maybe it's just the idea that it's the futility of reducing a person to a word. Maybe it's just a memory as he was dying that came to him that he said, and it didn't really have any deeper significance. So I think what is really good about Rosebud is it kind of saves the whole movie. It's that one little bit of inconsistency that kind of throws the rest of the narrative into question. Pretty much everything else is very consistent about Kane, but we throw in kind of this little emotional gesture. The fact that he says it as his last word shows how important it is to him. But on the whole, like I said, I don't think it lives up to this. So how are we going to rate this movie? So as per general, I like to do what I think objectively, if I was looking at this from just what makes a good movie fundamentally versus what my personal tastes are. So I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10, which on my scale is great. Keep in mind that for me, like a passable movie is a 5. A 5 or a 6 is something that I'll watch and say, yeah, it was all right. I don't regret spending my time watching it. So 8 is great. It's quite high on the list. the positives to me are is it feels a lot more modern in terms of its structure and editing than a lot of golden age films, particularly pacing. The central theme is very impressive, and I think particularly given the ending monologue dialogue that I read to you, it's very well presented, and I'm kind of happy that even if we don't get a conclusive answer to who Kane is as a person, we do get a conclusive answer to the themes of the movie and what it was trying to get across. Obviously, very technically expressive and enjoyable despite its age. As we've said in the past, I'm not the person you should really ask about cinematography. I'm not a very visual person, but I do admire how it was done in this. My issue is, like I said, it doesn't deliver on its thesis of unknowability. It lacks the contradictions that it kind of promises. And Rosebud kind of feels like a cheat code to a bit. It's just like, okay, we're just going to throw this in to throw a monkey wrench in, but it's not really built up or needed. So looking at a more objective evaluation, just very groundbreaking. It does a nonlinear story with unreliable narrators very well. I'm not sure if too many movies from that time period were able to carry something like that off. The fact that it was made in the 1940s and it's still something you can pick up and watch today and follow it perfectly well is something I find very interesting. It's not to say they're in a different language or something, but just pacing and stuff was very different back then, and it can be a little weird maybe for modern audiences to go through. A lot of the cinematography was just very innovative, the musical score, and maybe from like an objective standpoint, my only kind of complaints are, once again, heavy-handed symbolism with Rosebud. It's almost become too much of a meme, and I think it's kind of overtaken for me what the film's actual interesting message was. And the mystery is weaker than what critics claim. I guess it's technically a mystery film. I view it more as a fictional biopic than any sort of real mystery, because the mystery I don't think was ultimately that interesting. So that is the review of Citizen Kane. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like the new style that I'm doing these in, the more organized style, let me know and I will keep it up. These take a bit more longer to do, but I do think that they're better quality. So God bless. Have a good week, everybody, and more exciting content to come.